We're almost halfway through the year, and a lot of people are running on empty without fully realizing it. Grow Therapy helps you find care that's covered by insurance before burnout becomes the baseline. Whether it's your first time in therapy or your 50th, Grow makes it easier to find a therapist who fits you, not the other way around. They connect you with thousands of independent licensed therapists across the U.S., offering both virtual and in-person sessions, nights and weekends. You can search by what matters, like insurance, specialty, identity, or availability, and get started in as little as 2 days. And if something comes up, you can cancel up to 24 hours in advance at no cost. There are no subscriptions, no long-term commitments. You just pay per session. Grow helps you find therapy on your time. Whatever challenges you're facing, Grow Therapy is here to help. Grow accepts over 100 insurance plans, including Medicaid in some states. Sessions average about $21 with insurance, and some pay as little as $0 depending on their plan. Visit growtherapy.com/booknow to get started. That's growtherapy.com/booknow. growtherapy.com/booknow. Availability and coverage vary by state and insurance plan.
This is Peter.
And this is Tom.
And you're listening to History Teachers Talking Podcasts. All right, this is Peter Zablocki and Thomas Reska, and welcome back to our podcast. Tommy, this is long overdue, I guess.
I feel like we say it's a lot. We've talked about it a lot. I think some other people have said, when are you guys going to do this? And we just say it was such a long topic. I guess we could have done a 1 and 2, but really we're just kind of like skipping, I guess, to like the third act, right? In this person's life. So we're looking at really the fall of a dictator. In this case, we're looking at the fall of Napoleon, right? Who was basically a soldier who made himself the Emperor of France. Really defined early 19th century Europe through all the Napoleonic Wars, continental system. He had his ups and downs as a great conqueror, and he basically just like spent his final years in exile on St. Helena, which is what we'll look at somewhat today. Just really talk a little bit about him as a person and what he did, but also ultimately we're really just going to focus on how everything came unraveled pretty quickly. Like he lived. You talk about people living a life. Napoleon, he lived a life.
Yeah, we'll do like think of it like a preface to a book. We'll tell you like what made Napoleon real quick, and then we'll just jump right into the third act, like you said, right? The downfall of Napoleon. Because if we were to try to do a Napoleon podcast, I mean, we wouldn't be able to do it justice. This man really is greater than life, and it would require a multiple part thing. I mean, if you look at world history textbooks, a big chunk of them are Napoleon, especially if you look at AP Euro textbooks.
A lot of impact on the United States also.
Yep. Oh yeah. Well, I think we might briefly mention that.
Yeah.
All right. So let's like just quickly, I'm going to run through who is Napoleon and, his kind of quick rise to power. I'm not going to get too specific. And then we'll kind of get into Russia, coldness, and the beginning of the end. Napoleon was born in Corsica. It was a French-ruled island in the Mediterranean. By the time he was 9 years old, he was sent to France for a military career. When the French Revolution starts, he is a 20-year-old lieutenant, like really eager to make a name for himself. During the turmoil of the revolution, he kind of quickly rises in the army, right? In December of 1793, he winds up driving the British forces out of the French port of Toulon. After that, just wins several just amazing victories against the Austrians. He captures most of northern Italy, forces the Habsburg Emperor to make peace. Then, to disrupt British trade with India, he invades Egypt in 1798, which doesn't actually go that well. Kind of manages to hide the stories of that because by then he's already super popular. And by 1799, this is basically the beginning of Napoleon's time. He dominates France from 1799 to 1815. In 1799, he kind of moves over from being this victorious general for France to a political leader. That particular year, he helps overthrow the weak Directory, which ruled France during that time. He sets up a 3-man governing board known as the Consulate, and then he names himself the first consul. From there, he doesn't really stick around there for too long because by 1800, really asserts his power. He gets Spain to return Louisiana territory to France, which becomes a big deal for America later. By 1802, names himself consul for life. And then shortly thereafter, within like 2 years, by 1804, he assumes the title of Emperor of the French. This was kind of like an interesting thing too when you start reading into this.
Big deal.
Big, huge deal, because he invites the Pope, right, to preside over his coronation in Paris. And during the ceremony, the Pope, has the crown, and he's about to place the crown over Napoleon's head. And at that point, Napoleon grabs the crown by himself and puts it on his own head. And like by this action, he kind of shows the world that like no one gave him this throne by himself, like it's his.
That he did, yeah, and that's at Notre Dame Cathedral. I think that happens, right?
Yep.
1804, and he does all this, and he says it's like it was showing him that he reached a pinnacle of power by his own merit. Like it wasn't the Pope that said, "No, now you're the emperor." It's no, I did it myself, and it was like shocking too. He didn't even get along with the Pope, right? A lot after this.
Yeah.
I know there was a lot of like issues. Well, also because he gets a divorce. That was also like a main reason. That was a big deal back then. But yeah, he did not get along with the popes after this at all.
Nope. And just kind of to sum up, basically, you think of like liberty, equality, and fraternity, which were like the big key words of the French Revolution, are quickly changed under Napoleon to like order, security, and efficiency. Like he rules, I don't want to say with the iron fist, because that's obviously attributed more to Stalin. However, he basically has social and economic reforms. He welcomes order. I mean, he creates what is known as the Napoleonic Code, right? Which is like a new code of laws about equality of all citizens before the law, religious toleration, abolition of feudalism. So he really kind of grows the French Empire, which really leads to the beginning of the ultimate end, which was the Napoleonic Wars that began in 1804 until 1812. He basically furthers his reputation on the battlefield as an amazing tactician and an amazing general. In these wars, he winds up battling combined forces of the greatest European powers.
Yeah, they all teamed up against him. And he beat him for the most part.
He beat him. That's the crazy part, right?
They used to beat him.
So his grand empire reached its greatest peak and extent by 1812. As a military leader, right, he was particularly known for very rapid movements. He made effective use of his large armies. And he basically developed this plan where he always developed a new strategy and a new plan for each battle. So that way the opposing generals could never really anticipate or guess what he would do next. Like every battle, he would sit down and be like, let's plan this one differently. Basically redrew the map of Europe, abolished the Holy Roman Empire, created 38 members of Confederation of the Rhine, right, under the French protection. The only major European power that he cannot get is Britain. And Britain...
He plans to. He wants to.
He plans to. So go ahead. Yeah. So what does he try to do here?
Well, I just know he's a whole bunch of things that he wants to do. He wants to invade Britain, which is something that I don't think was the last time it was successfully done was 1066, I believe, William the Conqueror. So he tries to do, or at least plans to do it, but it's just never transpires for a variety of reasons. Basically, because Britain has such a powerful navy. That's basically what it is. So he keeps on doing this. He keeps on trying different ideas to somehow invade Britain. He plans it. He masses thousands of troops and hundreds of thousands of troops. It just never really happens because the British naval superiority always spoils his hopes. On land, he was invincible. His grande armée, that's what he called it, thanks to their leader's brilliancy and his how he executed his strategies. But when it came to seafaring, they were just too far behind the British, so they could never been able to cross the English Channel and attack the British. It just couldn't happen. And they actually do go to a kind of like a peace, right? Like 1807 around there, they make kind of this like tenuous peace. Doesn't last very long, but when they're doing this, it does really well for the French economy. And that's also when he puts in the continental system, right? You want to talk a little bit about the continental system, I guess? Because this is something that I think starts that domino effect that leads to his downfall.
Oh, yeah. It angers a lot of people in Europe that are his constituents. Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, good point. So because he rules out the invasion, you can't invade. Initially, he gets his butt kicked. His navy gets his butt kicked in 1805 near the coast of Spain, right?
Yes.
Basically, the French fleet shows that they are inferior to the British fleet. So then Napoleon figures out that he's going to strike at Britain's lifeblood, which is basically its commerce. Like England is because they control the seas, they control the world commerce. So this is a form of economic warfare through this continental system. He closed all European ports to British goods. And then Britain responded with their own blockade of European ports and basically shutting down all ports to keep people or supplies from moving in or out of Europe. This is also when Britain and France start seizing neutral ships that are suspected of trading with either side. This is where America gets involved and starts another podcast we already did, right? The War of 1812. But the continental system fails, and this is the first crack in Napoleon's mighty rule, I guess, because it doesn't bring Britain to its knees, number one. And although British exports decline, the powerful navy still kept the most vital trade routes open, specifically with India and America. But the trade restrictions that were created by this continental system created a scarcity of goods in Europe and set the prices just soaring and
You
intensified
had inflation. What's
resentment.
going on now? Yeah, you had
Yep,
inflation, and it actually weakened France the most
yep,
economically because Britain
yep,
had its own natural resource to really kind of sustain itself. So this was all going on. Then he's also waging what becomes known as the Peninsula War against Spain. Right,
yep,
Spain and Portugal. He's fighting time. They were both aided by Great Britain. So Great Britain's basically given the supplies and stuff like that and the weapons of war. It's very similar to, I guess, what you can say the Western allies are doing now, right? With the war in Ukraine, right? They're
yep,
giving the weapons to help fight the war. And Napoleon sets his sights on conquering the Iberian Peninsula, and he actually does it in 1808 and installs his older brother Joseph as the king of Spain. And this rubs a lot of people the wrong way, not just in Spain, but also in France. Like he's kind of making a monarchy, right?
yep,
The French had the whole French Revolution to get rid of the monarchy. Now they almost have a new one again in Napoleon, and they're like, this is not really what we want. So Joseph was the king of Spain for a while, a very short period of time, only 1808 to 1813. But this really upsets the Spaniards because they're like, listen, we used to be allies with you. We were allies with you in some of these early wars against the British. And now suddenly, you're attacking us. They don't appreciate that. And it was really a costly war. Even though they won, they beat Spain. It was really a turning point. There was a moment where a lot of his previous allies, they're like, maybe he's getting too land greedy. He wants everything. This is when they're really seeing that he wants world, and they're just saying this is not. We have to stop him. So they're kind of like exploring these back channels, talking with the British, talking with these other countries about what are they going to do to really get rid of Napoleon because he's dangerous,
yep,
and he kind of sets himself up, which we can talk about
yeah.
whenever you're ready.
Yeah. Just to kind of add a little bit before we move on, the Spanish patriots were so against the French. I mean, the resistance to the French, what they called invaders, really, French invaders, was based off of a campaign of guerrilla warfare. It was basically
Yes.
hit and run raids because they couldn't really face the French. They couldn't face Napoleon's army. So small bands of guerrillas, they would ambush French supply trains, troops. Then they would retreat to the countryside. And these attacks basically kept large numbers of French soldiers tied down in Spain
Yeah.
when Napoleon needed them somewhere else. Because while Spain is starting to fight back, you now have other countries that are like, wait a second, like people are fighting back against Napoleon. That's when Austria kind of starts to flex its muscles, not
Yeah.
successfully, but at least they start.
Well, they lose a little bit of fear, I guess, of him. Right? They
Right.
realize that there is a tactic that they can use. Those hit and run tactics. I mean, that goes as far back as warfare, right? Like
Yep.
this, a stronger, larger, more powerful force. You're not going to fight it head on, but if you do those little nips, right, those little bites, like it's the whole analogy to Viet Cong used to say, right, the fire ant against the elephant. One of them isn't
Yep.
going to do it, but you have like millions, thousands. Those bites are going to eventually take their toll, and that's really what's going on in France. Like you said, they win the war, but they lose a lot of soldiers in the process, and that's going to come back and hurt him. And it
Yep.
changes people's perception of Napoleon.
Yep. So in 18, he won the first battle against Austrian-Russian forces in 1805. But now the Austrians in 1809 again are like, all right, we're going to try what Spain's doing. They basically sought revenge, but once again, Napoleon triumphs. Right, he wins. But now this is when it gets. This is really the beginning of the end. Napoleon decides that the Tsar Alexander the First of Russia, who was once an ally to Napoleon, is no longer worthy of being a French ally.
Yeah, well, he's
Right.
not. Yeah, he's not crazy about the continental system. He doesn't like it.
Yep.
He wants to trade with the British, and then it's basically an arrogant overreach that makes essentially his empire to crumble down. Very similar to what you see, later on when Hitler does the same thing, right?
Yep.
So Napoleon actually says, "In 5 years, I shall be the master of the world. There only remains Russia, but I shall crush her." So he always kind of wanted to do this or planned on doing this, and he amassed a massive force of more than 600,000 soldiers, and they were well
Absolutely.
trained, well equipped, right? And they marched into Russia in June of 1812. To form an alliance, and they do this because Russia formed an alliance with Britain over the continental system.
Yep.
So he goes in there, and they are doing a really Napoleon's plan is to engage Russia, go and fight Russia, and have this big, massive battle decisive battle. That's his plan. And it happens, but it happens a lot later than Napoleon wanted. And then what's happening is the Russians, I'm sure everyone knows this, the Russians are
Yeah.
doing that scorched earth policy. They're not fighting Napoleon one-on-one. They're just retreating. And as they do it, they're destroying everything around them. They're destroying their own country. They
Yeah,
don't
burning
care.
crops,
Yeah,
villages,
anything,
anything.
anything that's there, slaughtering any animal, destroying, polluting all the wells, and they're doing this on purpose so that Napoleon and his soldiers, they can't forage off the land. They brought supplies with them, but as they move deeper into Russia, those supply lines are getting longer, and they're using more supplies, and it's just something that's not sustainable.
Well,
And you
that's
can
what
see
it is,
that.
right? I mean, he brings
Yeah,
600,000 soldiers, as you said, Tom, and
it's a
50,000
huge number.
horses on top of that. You got to feed the horses, you got to feed the soldiers. And even though he makes it to Moscow by September, it's very short lived because he realizes very quickly that he's not able to feed or supply his army through the
Yeah.
long Russian winter that's coming,
Yeah. Well, yeah,
right?
because he wins that decisive battle. I forget what the battle was
Yep.
called, but he wins this decisive battle, but he loses like 40,000 men in the battle. And
Yep.
he talks about later on in his books or memoirs, letters, that he says, I proved that I'm invincible on the battlefield. No, that I proved that I can win in the battlefield, but the Russians prove they're invincible. That you can't beat Russia in Russia.
Yep.
It's just something that can't happen. Because he burns down Moscow, and he thought that would end the war. And the Russians are just like, all right, well, we're still fighting. And
Yeah.
he's like,
Yeah.
this is just not going to work. And he realizes it's not going to work, particularly when the winter starts to come. So he comes in with 6,000. By November, he has 400,000, and then he winds up, I think, only 150,000 ever make it back. Because most of
Yeah.
them wind up freezing to death or starve in the retreat back to France. He gets out
Yeah.
a little way before that. Obviously, he sneaks
Yeah, you
out.
have it's a 1,000-mile retreat from Moscow, right? Turns into, they said, a desperate battle for survival, and the Russian winter took its toll. There's no food, and so many people left that even that about 100,000 survived out of the 600. Historians calculate that by the time that you add the deserters to it and all that stuff, only about 20,000 soldiers of the Grand Army actually returned back to France, which is crazy. He goes in with 600,000 and comes
Yeah.
back with anywhere between 20 to 100,000 tops. And this clearly shows the world that Napoleon is not invincible.
And what it does is it creates the Treaty of Chaumont, right, in
Yep.
1814 between Austria, Russia, Prussia, and Great Britain. And they say for the next 20 years, we are going to be in this alliance. So it's a 20-year alliance. And the whole point of this alliance is that whenever one of us engages Napoleon, we're all engaging Napoleon. They're not stopping until Napoleon is overthrown. That's what it says. And they're also not going to negotiate any separate pieces with Napoleon. It's going to be
Yep.
all or nothing. So all these Austria, Russia, Prussia, and Great Britain, which are basically these massive land powers, right, in Europe, and they're all saying, no, we're all fighting together, and these are all against, Napoleon, and that's basically what they do. And they actually arrive eventually in Paris, right, on March 30th.
March 30th, yep. The issue here is because by March 30th, first of all, he had not yet rebuilt his army.
No,
So that's step one. He had an issue rebuilding his army because he lost so many men fighting in Russia. And while these guys, this grand alliance of Austria, Russia, Prussia, and Great Britain marches on to Paris in March, Napoleon's actually not in Paris. He takes his army and their entire rear guard, and the idea is that he's going to attack these invaders from the rear, like surprise them from the rear. But before he actually has a chance to attack them from the rear and have any success at doing so, his own government in
turns against
Paris
them.
turns against him. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, well, basically, he's planning this big attack, like you said. But then there's as the president of the provisional government, a man by the name of Talleyrand. He
Hmm.
proclaimed at the deposition of the emperor, and without the consulting the French people. So he said that the emperor's done. He just said he's done, and he's began to negotiate with Louis the 18th, the brother of the executed Louis the 16th.
16th. Yep.
And yeah, so and he's basically saying, all right, we're going to put you back. We're going to restore the monarchy almost back to France, right? And by the time Napoleon reaches where he wanted to fight and have this battle, he heard that Paris had already capitulated, was already gave up. So he basically, he realized that that resistance was basically useless at this point. So he abdicated on April 6th. He said, "Fine, I'm done." And you have the Treaty of Fontainebleau, right? Fontainebleau,
Hmm.
and the Allies granted him the island of Elba as his sovereign principality. Okay, he's going to get an income of 2 million francs to be provided by France and a guard of 400 volunteers. And he can also retain the title of emperor, but he's not going to be in France. He's going to be the emperor of Elba, right? This is your island. and he agrees to it because he has no real choice. He actually tries to kill himself.
Yeah, with a
He
pill. He
actually
takes a
with a
pill.
pill that he took. But the problem was the pill was from the Russian campaign, and it was kind of exposed to the elements, and he gets sick, but it doesn't kill him. And so he gets his journey, and he arrives on Elba on May 4th, but he doesn't stay there very long. And they're all a lot of like, particularly Britain is like, we need to just kill him. Like they don't want him alive. But
Yeah.
he's still kind of like a very respected figure in Europe, and they know if they just kill him, it might cause like a lot more resentment and stuff in France.
Yeah, you want to make a
Now,
martyr. You don't want to make a martyr.
yeah,
That's
and
the
he
whole
did it,
point.
and he did surrender. Like he could have actually raised a military and continued the fight. They were like, all right, we'll let him there. And he said, I want from now on to live like a justice of the peace. That's what he declared on his little island. He really couldn't resign himself. He was only 45 years old when this happened, and he was not really just gonna let that happen, as
Yep.
we know.
I mean, this was an embarrassment because they're like,
Yeah,
you could
he took it
still,
as
you're
an
gonna,
embarrassment. Yes,
yeah,
that's
like
something to
you are
really
still
understand.
the emperor. You're just an emperor of this little island of Elba. Like this was a diss to him because by leaving him in power of this little insignificant island, it's almost like, look how far you've fallen, right? It was mockery more than
Yeah,
anything
well, another
else.
thing the other thing that you have to understand too is he was left there without his wife and his son. Okay,
His
so
wife
he's
dies
he,
shortly thereafter,
well,
doesn't
that
she?
was his first wife. Josephine passes away. He finds
Yep.
that out, I think, on Elba.
No,
That's
he's
on
on
the other
Elba.
one.
Yeah, a
He's on
few
Elba when
months
that
into
happens.
Elba. Yep.
Yeah, and his younger wife and his son Napoleon II. He doesn't see them. He actually never sees them again. But a lot of the things that he was promised, like his income that he was supposed to have, that never showed up. Like so, his money.
Yeah. Plus, I think his wife starts cheating on him. I think he
Well, yeah,
finds out his wife
well,
starts cheating.
they were both kind of cheating on each other too. That was kind of
Well,
what
yeah.
happened. But yeah, because he was cheating on people also. There was also the individuals in France, and he finds out of this through backdoor channels that they want to basically return the power. That there's
Yep.
a huge movement of people who are loyal to him in France. That the French people actually, he feels that they want him to come back. So he's plotting a return, and he actually does sneak out and lands in France on March 1st, 1815, with a guard of several hundred soldiers, and he heads right to Paris. And as he's doing, he's gathering support along the way. And when he reaches the capital on March 20th, Louis XVIII already fled. He left. I think he
Yeah, he's
flees
like,
to
uh-oh.
Belgium
Yeah,
because
Napoleon's back.
no one really liked him. They didn't want him back. So Napoleon's already there with an army behind him. He took power immediately, and that began his second rule. It doesn't last long. Well, it's known as a 100-day rule, but
Yeah.
it's a comeback. Like he comes back, and he was in exile. And a lot of people, when I read that, he might have stayed in exile if one, he was given what he was promised, and he had his wife and child with him. He might have just been more content to hang
Yeah.
out there. But because he didn't get everything he was promised, and all these people are saying, you have to come back, you have to come back. It puts the idea in your head. You're unhappy. You're not seeing your wife and kids. You're not getting everything else that you were promised in this deal. If they're not keeping their end of the bargain, I'm not keeping my end of the bargain. Let's go.
Yep. I also read somewhere that there was rumors he was already hearing that a lot of diplomats in Vienna were deciding his fate, even when he was in Elba. They were like, you know what? It's too close to France.
Yeah.
And so they were already thinking of banishing him somewhere distant island in the Atlantic, which is what they eventually do. But
Do you a
he's
little
hearing
farther?
rumors of this, like, it might be moved from here. Like, if I don't do
Yeah.
this now, like, I'm never going to do it. So, yeah, so he
Well,
basically sneaks on with, they
yeah.
say
He
sneaks on
didn't
with
want it to get any
thousands of people.
worse. Didn't
Yeah.
want to get any worse. Yeah. But he did have a lot of support. Obviously, you're not going to be able to garnish an army right away. I think he goes in front of them and says, "Look, I'm here. If you want to shoot your emperor." And
Yeah.
they start saying like "Viva la Emperor, Viva la Napoleon." So then they follow him back, and then that's what happens. And then he takes over again. The British right away are like, we can't be doing this, can't happen. So they align Britain, France, Austria, and Russia, prepare for war against Napoleon, who is wasting no time. He already had 120,000 men. I really don't know how he keeps on. He gets these armies so quickly. Like that's
Well, think
everything
about it. I
Napoleon
mean,
did was very
he
fast.
brought France to such prominence in the world
Yeah,
that there were and
militarily.
people. I mean, he was the hero of France for so many years. So, regardless of the politician aspect, he was good to the middle class. He was good to the peasants. As far as the French were concerned, Napoleon was the face of France, or brought them to the heights they've never been to. So they see him more than a figure, like a pantheon. You know what I mean? Like he's a symbol.
Oh, yeah, he's a symbol of like France's power. He's seeing him as like a sense of like pride.
Yeah.
basically.
You know what's really interesting about all this? Like in we always study American history whenever we teach it or whatever. But when you look at American history in context of world history, this is a prime example. When you teach the War of 1812, and we're like, yeah, we're fighting against the British, and we're not losing to the British. This is why we're not losing to the British,
Yeah, because
because
they're fighting
literally,
Napoleon.
yeah, literally, right at the same time as America's like, yeah, we're fighting a war with the British aren't really fighting with us. Like this is the rest of the world is watching this event right here. Not America, not our idea of a second war for independence, but this. And while Waterloo's happening, there's not really a lot of regiments fighting Americans. It's when Waterloo finally happens, when Napoleon is defeated, that's when
That's when he really, yeah.
England's
That's
like, yeah, let's fight America. And that's when America's like, let's talk peace. Let's talk peace.
Let's
Like,
figure
yeah.
something out. And even with the Louisiana Purchase, like that happens, we all know, because Napoleon wants money so he
He
can
needs
help
money.
pay
Yeah.
for those wars. And he always intended on taking Louisiana back. Like that's
Yeah.
something too. Like, America was another one on his list, just like Russia was, that eventually,
Well, he
the
tried to
French.
escape to America. They caught him. He actually
There was,
tried to escape to America.
yeah, there was something he would thought. It was sort of interesting. I wonder how they would have treated Napoleon in
Yeah,
America.
like he almost made it. I mean, he got on the ship. They stopped his ship. He was trying to escape to America.
Yeah,
So, like,
he didn't want
it
that.
becomes a question: like, what if, right? Napoleon makes it to America? Is he treated as a hero? As like, what do they do with him?
Yeah, what would they do? They
Interesting.
grant him asylum or what? Yeah. So anyway, basically, like Napoleon's there, and he raises this large army, and the French army of the North. He plans on basically going into the Netherlands and stuff like that, modern day Belgium.
Hmm.
And two coalition armies show up to battle him. One is led by the Prussian Prince Blucher, and the other one is the more famous commander, the British Duke of Wellington. Right,
Yep.
and they meet
Dude.
at the Battle of Waterloo in June 18th, 1815, and Wellington's army withstood repeated attacks by the French. Right, the French are attacking, and they hold their ground. Right, and they
The
drive
British
them.
do. The British
The
do.
British, yeah.
Yep.
I'm saying, yeah. Wellington's army like repeat withstood these attacks that normally worked. Right, and they eventually drive them from the field. And then while the Russian forces
The
broke
Prussians.
Napoleon's
No, the Prussians. The
the
Prussians
Prussians, I'm
arrived.
sorry, and
Yep.
the Prussians arrive and they break Napoleon's right flank. So as he's retreating, as he's falling back, playing a counterattack, right? Remember, and everything
Yep.
Napoleon did was like several steps, right? I'm going to retreat here and do a counterattack here, but then the Prussians show up and then they're able to break through his right flank. And then by the time Napoleon returned to Paris and found the legislative and the people had turned against him, he realized that his position was, unattainable. He wasn't going to be able to keep in power. So think about it. June 18th, he has the Battle of Waterloo. June 22nd, he abdicates the throne in favor of his son. Now, before this, he was actually offered a couple deals, if you remember, right? And one of them,
Hmm.
whereas he actually gets to keep the title of emperor. He can stay in France. That was one of the deals. He can actually still control a lot of the land that he conquered, not everything, but a lot of it. I think up from like the 1790 borders. But he refused, and then he winds up losing Waterloo, and then that deal kind of goes away.
Yep.
It gets pulled away, and so he advocates in favor of his son Napoleon II, which never happens.
Yep.
He winds up leaving 3 days later. He settles on the right outside of Paris, but then as he's traveling to Paris, he's hearing about the coalition forces are sweeping to France. They arrive in Paris on June 29th. So he's like, I need to get out of here. And
Yep.
when they come in, they restore King Louis XVIII to the French throne. So that guy's been bounced all over the place.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
This guy's coming all over the place. Now he's back again, which is still crazy when you think about it, because now maybe you have the whole French Revolution. Now the French have a king again. But that's
Yep.
something for another
Yeah, yeah, and well,
story,
that's
another
why
podcast.
they didn't like Louis XVIII. Like this
Yeah.
wasn't. He didn't stick around either. This wasn't a.
It wasn't what the people want. Remember, this was
Yep.
done by the coalition army because they know they can basically control him, and he's not going to be, trying to do everything else and get France to be this like world power.
Yep.
He just wants to be in the throne. So when Napoleon heard the Prussian troops had orders to capture him dead or alive, he flees again. He just tries to escape to the United States, like you said, but the British ships are blocking every port. So he actually surrenders to Captain Frederick Madeline on July 15th, 1815. So Waterloo takes place on June 18th. By July 15th, he's in British hands. And then that's when they say, all right, now we're not going to keep you somewhere close. We're going to send you to in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, right? St. Helena, which is about 1,800 miles off the coast of Africa. And they even took like every precaution here. They send like a small garrison of soldiers there and an island right nearby too. So they can always watch him if he's
Yep.
trying to escape. and he never really can. He winds up having to stay. If you see where he stayed, they're saying that's probably how he got sick and died.
It wasn't a Longwood.
Longwood,
Longwood
Longwood,
House.
Longwood,
Yeah.
Longwood House, right? And basically, what he would do, he would wake up in the morning, he would sip a cup of tea or coffee, he would, get dressed, take, wash himself, and then for a while he started going on these like hikes and stuff on these rides, but then he was always followed by the British officers, so he stopped those. And then basically, but the area was not very well kept. It was very damp. It was
Yep.
very wet. It was rat infested, and he was guarded always by at least 125 sentries during the day and 72 at night. He said it was just like bored. He was just constantly bored. People were allowed to visit him, but as time went on, less and less people came, and also less and people were allowed to come and visit him. And it
Yep.
just basically drove him crazy.
Do you see the fact that like some scientists have speculated that it was arsenic, might have been arsenic poisoning that led to his illness because there was a form of arsenic in the
Yeah,
wallpaper, like the
yeah.
glue for the wallpaper in the
And I
Longwood
think
house he was at.
something about by the mines there too, right? Wasn't there? It
Yep.
was built by by like a copper mine or something like
Yep.
that.
Yep.
And the arsenic from that, they think that was where was slowly killing him.
Yep. And even when people showed up to visit him, you had to you had to, if you wanted to visit him, if someone from the old life wanted to visit him, they had to sign a paper saying that they're going to have to stay on the island, which basically made people not want to visit. You had to sign off like, if I come visit from France, I'm going to have to stay here forever in exile. Like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, that whole thing. And whenever they would even see a boat in distance, 500 guns were manned instantly. Like they were that worried about this guy coming back to power. And there was a lot of talk because the British did not want him alive. That's what you have to understand too. They kind of wanted him dead. But then as a couple of years went on, there was a lot of talk in some of the other countries like, are we really treating this guy properly? Like, is this how we
Yeah.
should be treating him? But he basically was, like you said, he was cut off from the world and he settled to a life really of, he would just read and write, and that's really it.
Yeah, reading and write is a good point you bring up, Tom, because they didn't give him much access to French newspapers or French books. This was another way to punish him. So
Yeah.
he actually learned English. While he's there, he is learning English so he could read something, and he winds up getting pretty decent at it. So for the most part, towards the end of his life, he's reading English newspapers and English books because they didn't give him much access to French newspapers. Again, they really kind of, talk about taking the Napoleon, right, and putting him in a bubble.
Yeah, and you have the pictures. Like, and obviously there's no pictures, but like the paintings,
Yeah.
it's very sad. Like they
It's
show
always
Napoleon, like
solitude, just by
it's
himself.
him with his head down, sitting on rocks, like by the
Yeah,
ocean, and just like remembering what. I remember at one point he was conquering most of Europe. Or he conquered Europe, right? He
yeah,
had visions of conquering the rest of the world, and now you're on this tiny island surrounded by soldiers, just like living in a house infested by rats and damp and wet. And he even complained about it a lot in the beginning, but then he realized they weren't going to change it. There was like nothing he could really
yeah.
do. So he just kind of settled to this life of routine, like you said.
Oh, it's terrible. He played a lot of cards. They said he became awesome at solitaire. Like, no pun intended, but he literally played like solitary games, like in cards. Um. So let's talk about the beginning of the end, right? I mean, his health gets really bad in February of 1821. So he got to Seine. When did he get to the island? It was in 1815. It was 1815.
1815, yeah.
So he was there. Wow, he was there for like 6 years before like
Yeah.
things start to really.
Yeah. So basically what
Okay.
happens is the first 2 years, things are, he's actually not treated great, but he gets really good food and stuff like that. And a lot of the people that were there kind of got really, I don't know, like they not liked him, but they kind of started to respect him and stuff like that. Then in 1817, the end of 1817, he started to have some of sign of illness, mostly ulcers. And original autopsy is he died of stomach cancer, but they don't think that was actually the case.
Well,
That's when his
it was
wife,
massive stomach pain, right? That was the thing. He
yeah, these
complained
pains,
a
yeah.
lot of not being able to go to the bathroom, of being heavily constipated, of having excruciating abdominal pain, and I mean, for the longest time, I think that's still more or less believed that it probably was stomach cancer, right? Isn't that still the
Yeah,
belief?
but probably possibly caused from again like all the
Oh,
arsenic
yeah.
and everything like that was in that area. But they were never I guess 100% sure. But they did do DNA. They did do testing on him. I guess later on that it
Yeah.
was all like the arsenic. But the his physician put the cause of his death at stomach cancer. So he dies right in when does he die?
Dies in February 1821.
1821. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
that's
and then they make a
so
death mask of him, which you could see
that's
online.
and supposedly he says like when he's dying he says like, my France, my son, my army. And then his last word supposedly is Josephine, which was his first wife's name.
Yeah.
And then he dies.
Um, And then they said that they removed his heart and intestines and put him in separate containers that were placed by his feet inside his coffin. And
Yeah,
also,
something else. Yeah,
his wish was to be buried back in France, but the British were like, "Yeah, that's not going to happen." So they buried him right on the island, which eventually they wound up moving him over. But at the time, that's where they buried him. And it wasn't until
fascinating too. Yeah.
1840, right? 1840,
Yeah.
the French government obtains permission to move from the British to return his remains to
And they
France.
open
And
up the coffin,
yep,
and they, because of all the arsenic, because it's a good preservative, they were easily able to just look at his corpse. Really didn't decompose at all. They said,
yep.
because of all the arsenic that he had in his system. So that's
20
another
years
reason they
later,
think.
they
Yeah,
said
20
20
years
years
later,
later,
they're
he
like, it
looked.
was very
Yeah,
obvious to notice that was Napoleon. It was just obvious, and they've actually proved that later on.
and they gave him a state funeral. Like this
Yeah,
wasn't like this was a guy that like like Stalin or Hitler or anything like that. And they the French people were like, all right, like there was a time when Napoleon brought a lot of change that was some positive, some negative, but for the most part, he was known as the hero of France. So yeah, so we don't really know what maybe stomach ulcer, stomach
well,
cancer,
they did a lot of studies on his hair, and as recently as like 2008, and he basically had these huge
levels
number
of
amount
arsenic.
of arsenic, 100 times normal than average
Yeah.
levels of arsenic. So he was definitely exposed to huge levels of this again but a lot of people were during that time too. It was unintentional poisoning. They were exposed to, like you said, from the glues and the dyes that they were always exposed to, but he was exposed to even more of it on the island.
Some people say that he was actually murdered or poisoned.
Yeah, that's always been
That also comes out.
rumored, something like that too, because the British were just so worried about having him alive and worried about him possibly coming back. They didn't want, I guess Act 3, Act 4 of Napoleon. Didn't want that to
Crazy.
happen.
So overall, Napoleon, right? Impact on France and Europe, undeniable. The Napoleonic Code consolidated many changes of the revolution that came out. Right, France of Napoleon was a centralized state. Elections were held, expanded through limited suffrage. He wasn't really good or great when it came to women's suffrage, but overall, more citizens had rights and property, had better access to education under his regime. On a world stage, the Napoleonic Wars spread the ideas of the French revolutions. So the idea of democracy were spread throughout Europe. Interesting, instead of sparking nationalism towards France, his takeover of Europe sparked a lot of nationalist feelings across Europe in all the various countries, for the sheer fact that these countries wanted independence from France. I mean, the abolition of the Holy Roman Empire basically led more or less to the creation of Germany, unified Germany later on. That he played a part in that. Even across the Atlantic, right? Like 1803, his decision to sell the Louisiana territory, as we mentioned before, doubles the size of the United States. So Napoleon is felt like his effects of Napoleon's reign are felt for years, decades, centuries to come. No question about it.
Yeah, and he has a lot of legacy. Like you can say his nephew, Louis Napoleon, actually used his uncle's fame and to actually seize power in France. I'm sure you saw that.
Yep, yep, yep.
He winds up winning the presidency of the Second Republic with an overwhelming majority in 1848, and then he kind of does a coup de grace and winds up making himself emperor in 1852. Doesn't last super long, and after that, you really get a lot of like anti-Napoleon stuff, really up until later on in the early 20th century. A lot of comparisons, 20th century dictators with him, judging him with Hitler and Stalin. It's kind of like Napoleon out of the three is I guess, he's in the
Yeah,
best
yeah,
light out of the three.
yeah,
He was a
100%.
bit more tolerant, right? He released Jews from ghettos. He showed respect for human life to a certain degree. He was a general military, but he wasn't like genocide like you see by those people. For any
And
stretch of the
and
imagination.
we did mention Josephine, his wife. So while Napoleon's mistresses had children by him, Josephine never produced an heir, right? And this was, they say, potentially because of stress, imprisonment, because she was actually imprisoned during the Reign of Terror,
Yeah, French
or she
Revolution.
or she had an abortion early in her 20s. They say maybe that caused it. So Napoleon and his wife actually chose to divorce in a very cordial manner. Like, he was deeply in love with her. And the reason they got divorced is because he was searching for an heir. That's ultimately what it came down to. So even though their marriage was over, loved her for the rest of his life. When he heard of her death while he was in Elba in the first exile, he
Yeah.
locks himself in a room, refuses to come out for days, doesn't eat. And then, as you mentioned before, also, potentially or supposedly his final word on his deathbed in 1821 is also Josephine. But you know, he winds up eventually marrying Mary Louise. She was like 19. She was German, I think. It was Austria. She was the Duchess of Austria. So there was apparently a lot of children out there because of
Yeah,
Napoleon,
there
because
was.
of
He only recognized one mistress's in illegitimate
yeah.
children, but there was definitely probably several others. But
Ugh.
basically, Napoleon, he changed history of both France, but also the world too. Like the things that he did, he left an impact, and people know that name. And I guess we didn't even talk about it. He was not as short as everyone said he was. He was actually
Um,
pretty average size for the day, right?
he was apparently like anywhere between 5'5" and 5'7".
Yeah, which is like
Um,
pretty decent, even if he was 5'5". It's just like an inch or so below the period's average adult height. It was just more. They said that was more of something that happened after the fall of the Second Empire in France. People just started, anti-Napoleon literature, anti-Napoleon rhetoric really went in place there, and that kind of like changed anything. Actually, Robespierre was even smaller. Robespierre was 5'3". But just
that's
saying, George Washington, over 6 feet. Just
6 foot.
saying,
Yeah, he was
just saying,
6 foot.
the American comes in. Yeah, we'll fix it. Just saying.
Unbelievable. They said that
GW.
actually, the fact that he was kind of a small stature, I read somewhere that he developed this habit of just dressing down into like as a lower class person and just wandered the street of Paris. Like he would just walk around at night and his security guards were like, don't do this. And he just like wanted to find out what the man on the street wanted to know and what the man on the street thought about him. He would just quiz random people about the emperor. Like, what do you think about the emperor? Because again, it's not like you had TV. People didn't know
Yeah.
what he looked like when he walked around. So craziness. Anyway, I think that pretty much covers our podcast on the fall of Napoleon. As we said earlier, we could spend episodes on his entire
Just
life, but
unfortunate. And I'm sure there are podcasts dedicated just to Napoleon out there.
I guess that brings us to the end. As always, thank you guys so much for listening to our podcast. We greatly appreciate it. Join us again next week. And if you need to find us in between that, you could always find us at www.historyteacherstalkingpodcast.com. Please feel free to email us, ask any questions, comments, reactions, anything. We welcome it all. And don't forget to click that subscribe button or like button wherever you do see us. We do greatly appreciate it. So thanks so much, guys. We'll see you next week.
Stay safe, everybody.
I hope everyone enjoyed our podcast, and if you would like to email us, you can do so at historyteacherspodcast@gmail.com.